Hi there, today our video is going to be about how to face the London system with the black pieces. Our approach will be to break down White's most important plans and see how we should react accordingly to each one of them. So for this video we're going to take a look at White's most popular attacking plan, which involves playing a knight to e5 and attacking on the king side. So let's get on to it. So White plays d4. The system I'm going to propose is with d5, so players who play the Queen's Gambit decline will definitely benefit from this. So bishop f4, White plays the London, we're going to go knight f6, White plays e3, and we're going to play with the bishop inside the pawn chain, just e6. We're going to take care of that bishop, but we're going to play it to b7 and use it on the long diagonal. So knight f3, and first important moment I would say bishop d6, because we're going to fight for e5 every time we can. And White definitely gets more control of that square. He gets to play knight e5 if he wants, but we're going to fight for it. We're not just going to let White do as he pleases. So normally to keep control of e5, what White does is he plays bishop g3, and that enables him to play knight e5 and then even support it with f4. And by the way, the bishop on g3 is just not so easy to exchange, because if we take, White will take with the h-pawn, and then this open file can be pretty dangerous, especially with the rook being open alongside this bishop that goes to d3, creating threats on h7. So we probably don't like that. And we're just gonna castle. And after bishop d3, now we will play c5. And this is the setup we're gonna get. c3, b6, that's how we take care of the bishop, that's going to b7. White typically plays knight bd2. I'm sure you've seen White play this in your games a lot. He always gets the triangle in, he gets the bishop to d3, knight to d2, sorry, and f3, and then he puts a knight on e5. That's kind of a default for White against the London. So now we're going to play knight c6 or bishop b7. It's going to mount to the same. And now it's the time for White to play knight e5, because if he doesn't, then we may play queen c7 and then e5. Now we're really gonna fight for this square. We're ready. We already have two pieces there. If we get to play queen c7, it's gonna be 3, and White won't be able to play knight e5 anymore because we'll take, and after he takes back, we take, and we have the queen defending. So if bishop takes, finally we take with the queen. So if White wants to establish and consolidate the knight on e5, he'd better play knight e5 right now, before we take control of that square. And now he can support it with f4. That's why this bishop g3 is quite clever. But for now, we just complete our development and play bishop e7. This is the setup we were looking for. For this first game, we're going to see what's our plan if White puts absolutely no pressure on us. So in this game, White played castle. Oh, sorry, misclick, bad misclick there. So in this game, White just castle, which is not the main move and it's not as threatening. Normally White wants to keep the king in the center and keep the rook on the h file, because, well, he may advance this pawn, or he may just play f4, queen f3, and the king is still very safe in the center. This is quite a solid and hard to break center, so it's not like White's king is going to be under a lot of pressure or anything. It's a little bit of an exception to the regular opening principles where you just want to castle really fast, because White is really in no danger. This is a closed center, or at least a very stable one that is very hard to crack. So the king can stay on e1 for quite a while. In this game, White just castled and Black immediately played queen c7, attacking the knight on e5, which is really a big part of our plan. So f4 is still the main idea for White, but in this case, he just took on c6. Which is, well, not that dangerous really. Take back, And after bishop takes d6, queen takes d6. If white does nothing, we're just ready to push. And we will take a big piece of the center and be really comfortable. So in the game, white played f4. Maybe still intending to play knight f3 and knight e5 and getting the typical attacking plan, getting the rook to the king side or getting the queen involved. But it looks like it's very time consuming, and we're going to see that black has many defensive resources. And here is where we introduce our main idea. Once white plays f4, now we get e4. e4 is now a weak square for white, and it's a very nice outpost for particularly this knight. So if we put a knight there, the bishop is blocked. And that bishop is essential for any attempt that white tries to attack on the king side. So now we get this very important defensive idea. It's not the same with white's pawn on f2 because he retains the option of pushing us back. With the pawn on f4, that's no longer an option, and knight e4 becomes our first and most important defensive idea. So our idea with black is to attack on the queen side. It's naturally where we hold more space. We have these 2 pawns versus the pawn d4, and we're ready to push. So black just goes b5 as he doesn't feel threatened on the king side. At this point, I should mention we're following a game between Beratze and Jacobson, Grandmaster. That's pretty recent. I don't remember the year exactly, but I'm going to leave it in the comments. So white goes on with rook f3 and goes on with the plan. And c4, that's a big decision for black normally because we leave the tension here and it should be easier for white to focus on the king side. So this is not something that you do every time. It's just that we're getting there really fast and our attack on the queen side will be pretty good. And also there's the fact that white won't be able to push and break our pawn structure, which is typical when we release the tension here. White doesn't need to worry about d4 anymore, so he might think of breaking. But black goes there first. He just goes knight e4, and this bishop doesn't exist anymore, not as a part of this attack. So rook h3, g6, just to stop the queen from coming, of course. You might think after bishop takes e4, d takes e4, you might ask, what are we going to do about this? This bishop is pretty terrible. Not so much really. We have d5, and I know all our pawns are on light squares, but the bishop is quite effective defending everything and helping, supporting us as we push our pawns forwards. And if we compare it to the knight, it's not that terrible really, because the knight doesn't have any outposts. Notice that when we get e4, white doesn't get e5 because we retain the chance of playing f6 and just kicking that knight out of there. At this moment with the pawn e4, he can't even dream of getting a knight to e5 because the pawn is controlling all the possible accesses. So in this case, white went queen g4, and maybe black didn't play perfectly. I mean, it probably was better not to touch any pawns and just play queen e7, stopping any ideas for the queen to infiltrate. Though he played f5, but it's fine. Black is definitely not going to, is not going to checkmate with these 2 pieces. We have plenty of defenders here. Queen h4, rook f7, defends the second rank, and any minute now we're going to break through on the queen side, which is our main plan. The game went a4, a6, white broke on g4, he's still trying, but, well, black tries to take this to an endgame. And the endgame will really favor us in this case, because white has really no attack going on the king side, or at least nothing that dangerous. And as soon as we break into the queen side, white is going to be in so much trouble. White should probably keep the queen somehow, queen g3 or something, but, well, just to see how this is really hard for white to play, Let's take a look at what happened in this endgame quickly. The bishop is fantastic. This is never a problem because if the rook takes on a8, we have the rook defended. So no problem there. White tried to keep things close, but we still have one more pawn break. So rook b8, king f2, b4, and finally black is breaking in. Well, he's going to put a5 under pressure, king to the center, good endgame technique. Finally, he doubles up. He also plans to break on the other side. He's going to open two fronts, one on the king side, one on the queen side. And white is definitely on a defensive stance. Now we just exchange everything, and white has only one rook to defend there. He goes back because he's tied down to the e5 pawn. And now we slowly come to the king side, the queen side, and well, finally a tactic that's basically allowing us to break in. E takes f4, b takes c, b takes c, e3, and the bishop comes to f3 with check. Knight f1, bishop f3 check, king c2, bishop e4, king d1, and well, this is the move that black was planning on. Quite clever, and he sacrificed the pawn for like a second, but now the rook is coming in. Bishop d3 is also a problem, and if knight takes e3, we give a check, and it's a skewer, we capture the rook. So white tried king e2, and well, very clever, he just defends the pawn and threatens bishop h3 check. And well, the game continued for some time, but if knight takes e3, the most important thing is that rook h2 check ends up winning this anyway. If you go to f1, check, and again skewer. And if white tries king e1, instead of giving the check, which allows knight f1, it still allows knight f1, sorry, he plays bishop d3 first. We have two threats. One of them is check, followed by taking the rook, and the other one is rook e2, followed by taking the knight. And as it turns out, white can't really defend against both. If you try knight f1, and you try to be sneaky, because if rook h1, king f2, and the rook is defending the knight, then we're just gonna take. We're just gonna take the knight, and if king takes, we're finally set up to play the skewer. So white kept defending for a while here, but really there's no hope, and it's beyond the scope of what we're looking at. But that's the main plan if white does absolutely nothing and puts no pressure on us. But now let's go to the second game. This is a game by another strong grandmaster, Evgeny Postny. The player with the white pieces was a strong player, 2400, Peserovich. So let's take a look at the opening. d4, d5, knight f3, knight f6, bishop f4, c5. Again, we're not going to worry that much about move order. e3, e6, c3, and our move order goes bishop d6. But we're more interested in the setup now. Bishop d6, bishop g3, black castle, bishop to d3, and now b6. Knight e5 was played, bishop b7. Well, by via different move order, we get to the same position. In the last game, we saw white castle and then take on c6, releasing the tension, maybe a bit too fast. But in this game, white plays for the attack. He goes f4, and he's gonna try to attack on the king side. And now this is a huge maneuver. This is a very important one. Now white has this very well defended, and as we already know, when white pushes f4, the main square we're looking at now is e4. That square is crucial for us. We want a knight on e4. And black starts a very beautiful, very practical maneuver too with knight e7, which looks, well, kind of long, but it still works very well. The first idea is that now the bishop is going to be put to good use because we can play knight e4 anytime. In fact, for example, if white goes bishop h4, we're going to play knight e4 because our goal is to stick a knight on e4, just neutralize the light square bishop, which is so important for white, and then push away the knight from e5. And then we have a great defensive position. In fact, for example, if white castles, we kick that knight out of there, and if knight ef3, knight f5, bishop f2, we go bishop e7, and we're ready to put even the other knight on these seats and have total control of e4, which is a very common idea in this opening. So white played queen f3 as a response, and this is part of the maneuver, the all-important knight f5. Not so much because we want to take here, no. The idea is after bishop f2, which white plays because he wants to kick us out of there clearly, we play bishop e7. And then we complete our maneuver. We put the knight on these seats, and finally we get to play knight f2, e4, and then even f6. That maneuver is worth committing to memory because it's so important in this defense. White castle, and now knight d6. And black even has an advantage here, believe it or not. Because once we neutralize white's play on the king side, then it's quite easy to attack on the other side of the board, as it happened in this game and in many games. So just to recap, the second white plays f4, we should turn our attention to the e4 square. So the maneuver begins with knight e7. The knight is not doing much on c6 anymore, and it comes to help on the king side. We want to put a knight on e4. In the game, white played queen f3, to, well, keep control of this square and get the queen closer to the king side. But now we continue with our maneuver, and we're going to drive this knight all the way to these seats, and white won't have enough to fight for the e4 square anymore. So bishop f2, bishop e7, white castles, knight d6. And let's take a look at what white tried, but he really didn't have much. He played bishop h4, knight f2, e4, bishop takes e7, queen takes e7, queen e2 to defend the knight on d2. But now, well, we just get the rooks in position to attack on the queen side and start pushing the pawns forwards. White tried knight g4 because, well, f6 was coming anyway, the knight wasn't stable there anymore. And now a5. a5 is another typical idea. Whenever black gets the chance, he will play bishop a6 and take this bishop. Just exchange the light square bishop. When we get to exchange that bishop, we tend to get a great position. This is a hugely important piece for white in this system. All the pawns are on dark squares. If he loses that bishop, he loses control of half the board almost. I mean, all his light squares are just full of holes. Okay, so white played a4, so we don't just push the queenside pawns as easily. Knight takes d2, queen takes d2, and bishop a6. Very good move, forcing the trade. And notice that white, well, he made absolutely no progress on the king side. And now it's all about the queen side, where we are better. I mean, we are just going to play c4 and b5 or b5 and just start an attack there. And as it went, bishop takes d3, queen takes d3, queen c7. Black started to just focus on the queen side. Rook a b8, and now the intention is just to go b5. White should probably try to liquidate stuff in the center. I know it's hard to do because he has some advanced pawns that may be weak, but he had to try something because as it went, again, black goes for the same plan. Just pushes the pawn forwards, obtains semi-open files, open files on the queen side, and start attacking white's pawns. And, well, we know we have an advantage there. A takes, queen, rook takes, queen to d1, queen b7. We already have a lot of pressure down the b file. Rook a2, bad sign, having to play that. Well, the game went c takes d, and we're opening the c file in our favor. I mean, white blunder with e takes d, and now black has a very nice move, which you can try to find if you want, which is rook takes e3. And if b takes e3, rook b1. And we're gonna get the queen for 2 rooks, but with white having a lot of weak pawns. Then the game got a bit complicated for black because he didn't find the right way to infiltrate, but at this point it's clear that we are really in a much better position. I mean, the queen can really infiltrate, attack these pawns rather easily, and it's gonna be very difficult for white to try to hold. So let's go on to our next example, which is a very important theoretical game. It's very well known. It's a game between Sergei Karjakin and Michael Adams, so 2 very important players. So it went d4, knight f6, bishop f4, d5. See, this can happen in so many different move orders. Our move order, remember, is playing bishop d6 first, castling, and only then play c5. So we just sidestep any bishop b5 ideas. That's what I suggest, but this is also fine. Knight c6, knight b2 d2, bishop d6. There we go. We fight for the e5 square. Bishop g3. But don't go overboard trying to fight for e5, because if you play queen c7 here, believing that you will get to play e5, you will lose a pawn to d takes c5. That happens. You can't take because it's pinned. You'll just lose the queen. And if you take on g3, white takes, and you just lost the pawn. So maybe a bit too early. You have to castle, bishop d3, b6, and there we're getting the same setup basically. He plays knight e5, bishop b7, and Karjakin played f4 because, well, he knew he really shouldn't castle so early here, and he goes for the same attack. And now remember our idea, the main maneuver we have to remember, knight e7, excellent move. Now we have the ability to go knight to e4. The main theoretical move is something that your opponents probably won't find during the game, which is queen b1. Kind of a weird move, but it really stops you from playing both knight e4 and your maneuver with knight f5. Black can deal with this, there are good options, but it's the main try for white because this maneuver is so powerful, believe it or not. Sorry. In the game, I don't know what Karjakin's plan was, but he played queen to f3, and Adams managed to play this same plan, getting a great position in the process. Bishop f2, bishop e7, leaving these seats for the knight, and he got an excellent position. g4, knight d6, g5, and just in time, he puts the knight on e4. And we have an excellent blockade. Now we really shouldn't worry about the attack too much. This is a great position for black. He castled queenside. Very sharp, very risky too. He was probably hoping that he'll still get a big attack on the king side somehow because of his advanced pawns. But as it turned out, white's king was in more danger and it wasn't the other way around really. Now he went c4, fixing the clear target where we're going to make a pawn break that's just going to rip open white's position on the queen side. Bishop c2, b5, and well, really black is getting there way too fast for white to handle. Queen h3, b4 right away. It's not really a pawn sacrifice that white wants to take to accept. I mean, if pawn takes, we may just play queen b6, and if a3, a5, opening even more files, that pawn is really not up for grabs. So knight takes e4, and interestingly, he just takes with the pawn, and he intends to put a bishop on d5. Same idea as in the first game with Samin. So bishop e1, bishop d5, rook g1, b3. And yeah, white's attack develops so slowly, and we're already making threats. So a takes b, c takes b, bishop b1. And now this move, I don't know if it was necessary, but it's really beautiful and it shows great understanding. Adams plays f5, which basically takes g4 away from white. There are no ideas of just bringing pieces through that square. And it looks kind of crazy because it allows white to open the g file. But as it turns out, black's bishops are so good at defending the critical points that white gets absolutely nothing. And black also gets some important squares, mainly f5 for the knight, which is a fantastic knight if we get it there. It defends g7, attacks e3. And meanwhile, we basically left behind this piece. This piece is essential in any attack, and it's just away from it. The pawn e4 keeps it prisoner, so white is never going to get something going here. So rook g4 was attempted, knight f5, king d2, trying to probably free the queen because it was defending this. Queen a5, and the queen is just infiltrating. It's very, very nasty to defend. King e2, trying to escape. Bishop takes e5. Now that the knight takes care of everything, we don't even need the bishop. We just take care of that knight. D takes e5. F takes e5 was probably no better, as there is this. Actually, bishop c4 check, and the king has to step onto the f file where we can play some discover check. I'm sure, like knight takes d4 check. So that's not looking great for him. If d takes e5 as it happened, rook a to d8, still threatening bishop c4, king f2, queen a1, and d2 seems to be falling apart. And if rook d2, we play bishop c4, and he can't really escape the exchange of rooks. Or rook d2, well, we might just take the bishop, of course, too. So it's really hopeless. Bishop d2, bishop c4 first because it pins the bishop. Now bishop c1 loses the rook. And, well, white plays queen h5, but the king side is completely untouchable. The knight takes care of everything. Queen takes b2 with a pin on the bishop, king e1. And after rook takes d2, white just resigned because he's losing the bishop on b1 too, with check, and we have this passed pawn. It's just too much. So a pretty demolition job by Adams, but this is a very nice blueprint of how black should approach these positions. And that maneuver to occupy e4 is extremely important. Okay, let's take a look at our next game. Even though this video is not on theory really, let's take a look at some of white's ideas in the absolute main line. I mean, well, we're going to repeat all these moves. This game really resembles more what we want to get in terms of move order, with bishop d6 first, bishop d3 c5, c3 b6. We construct that setup again. White plays knight e5, knight c6, and white plays f4. And as soon as he plays f4, we put our attention to e4, as we're going to repeat once and again. And black plays knight e7. He starts his journey to getting a knight into e4 and kicking that knight out of there. That's the main thing. So we've seen some games with queen f3. Now white tries the main theoretical idea, queen b1. The queen on b1 makes sense, even though it doesn't look like it does, because it stops our maneuver, at least for now. It doesn't allow knight e4. White has enough control there. He will just win a pawn if we stick a knight on e4. And at the same time, if we play c4, he still has c2 for the bishop. Very important. If he plays queen c2, not only he gets the queen on a file that can be dangerous, we may just play c4 at once and the bishop will have to retreat because the bishop wouldn't have the c2 square. So if we see it like that, well, queen b1 actually does make some sense. And well, now g6, which you might think it's dangerous because it softens the dark squares a little bit, but we have more than enough to defend there. If he goes bishop h4, we still play knight to f5. We're still trying to get knight f5 in. And really bishop takes almost never works for white. We just take with the pawn and we get a huge square on e4 now. And white just got rid of his most important bishop. And at the same time, it might look like the structure is similar, but the main difference is that we retain the pawn on f7. So after some maneuvering, we're going to be able to push f6, kick this knight out of there, and this weakness will be huge. We will just pile up on that pawn. And if white tries some tactic quickly, it just doesn't work. I mean, this fork always gets counterattacked with some queen e7 or something that attacks that pawn e3. Same before, after bishop h4, knight f5, bishop takes f6 immediately, doesn't work. Queen takes, knight e7, and we get a very strong counterattack here with queen h4, which is very nasty for white. In g3, we have the typical tactic, knight takes g3, and the rook is hanging on h1 because the pawn is pinned. So white can't go for that. And with knight f5, we're basically kicking that bishop out of there, and it becomes really uncomfortable for white. So bishop h4 doesn't really do the trick. Notice that we can always go back to e7 if we need to. So no issues there. He should probably go bishop f2. But if he does, he has accomplished nothing, and we may just resume our maneuver, just play bishop e7, knight d6, and put a knight on e4. So this won't help white. That's why he plays bishop f2. He's not encouraging us to play knight f5. Like if we do right now, we might get hit with g4, and we don't have d6 for the knight. So what black did in this game is also kind of typical for black in this situation. Now that the f4 pawn is not as well defended, he takes. Interestingly, because white normally wants to take back not with the c pawn but with the e pawn. It's the ideal way to take back. C takes d, well, it allows bishop b4, which is kind of annoying. But e takes d, the problem with e takes d is knight h5. That attacks the pawn, and then we're gonna hit the knight, so it has to go back. This is another defensive setup that might appear. So g3, f6, there's nothing on g6, like knight takes g6, h takes, bishop takes. We may just take, the queen takes with check, but we pull the knight back, and we have more defenders than there are attackers, so that's not a good prospect for white. It's not a correct piece sacrifice. We're just gonna threaten to exchange queens until the attack fades away completely. So after f6, knight e to f3, well, queen c8, again, do you know what the idea is? We have seen in the previous games, and it's about taking this one out via bishop a6. This bishop disappears, and white is just full of holes everywhere. All the light squares are, well, completely hopeless. It's very hard to defend a color complex without the corresponding bishop. And the problem for white is that there's little to do against this idea, really. He castled, bishop a6, he took on a6, queen takes, and I know that it seems like we have a weak pawn on an open file, but the light squares fully compensate for this, and it's a very easy pawn to defend too. Queen e1, The knight goes back to g7, and we have everything nicely defended. And now we can finally start thinking in terms of our usual plan. We're going to go b5, b4, get a weakness here, and attack on the open files that appear on the queen side. It's just a different way in which black stabilizes the position on the king side. But we're getting to it. Bishop e3, knight e2, f5. Well, white started pushing. He thought it was his best chance, trying to attack on the king side as he usually does. Rook a2, e8. Rook a2, e1. And finally b5. Now he starts pushing. Now his king side and center is perfectly well defended. And he starts pushing and trying to make white acquire a weakness there on c3. So white plays a3. So that we will have to play a5 and b4 to get something going there. So queen c6, rook to f2, and black plays this very annoying move, queen c7, because white has so many weaknesses after pushing the kingside pawns. We're just threatening to take on f4. So knight h4, and now white doesn't have his attention on e5, and black just broke there, which is another idea. F takes c, f takes c, rook takes f8, rook takes f8, and it might seem that white can take, but there's a problem on the g1 a7 diagonal with the pin. So d takes e5 will lose the queen immediately to bishop c5. And that's a big problem because white's king is totally unsafe having pushed this pawn. So black was quite clever to break the center. Now the king is totally exposed, and there's really nothing white can do about e4. The game went queen e2, e4, and these pawns are really smothering these poor knights. White is quite hopeless here. He played knight f1, queen back to c6, knight e3, improving the knight a little bit, but black is going to do the same. Knight h to g2, knight g5, and the knight is already eyeing that square. Rook f1, check, king h1. This is from a game Chipik Brunner. It was a game that was played online. And here black could have just gone bishop b8 and play this very annoying maneuver, which would have been decisive. And he chose another way. He ended up winning eventually, but well, it's kind of off topic and there were ups and downs. But yeah, quite powerful display by black, who even against the main line showed that the knight f5, knight d6 idea is pretty much present all along. Just playing g6 against queen b1, you can still think about that maneuver. And even though white did everything in his power to stop it, black got enough counterplay. Instead of getting knight to e4, he just got it out of the way and pushed white's knight back. Another way of doing that is going knight e8, pushing the knight away from e5, and then playing knight g7, which sometimes happens. So those are the main ideas if white plays knight e5 and plays for an attack on the king side. As we've seen, we have plenty of counterplay by making it all about the e4 square. The idea is to put a knight there, consolidate it, push the knight away from e5 if we can, and when we got total control, finally, we might manage to just start pushing on the queen side, which is our main strategical goal. Thanks a lot for watching. If you like the content and find it useful, please subscribe and leave a like. Thanks a lot.